Hey, hey, story lovers. You asked for it, and so here it is, Zainab's story. And tell me at the end, was karma too soft on Zainab? Also, if you missed the first part of this side chicks versus the wives story, click the link below to watch it. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy. The glimmer of the charity gala was everything Zainab had imagined it would be. Flawless, impeccable, and filled with the kind of people whose opinions mattered, the Lagos elite. The goal was to raise 250 million naira this year, after last year's success. Standing beside her husband, Senator Obiori, she painted them as the perfect political power couple. Zainab smiled for the cameras, each movement carefully calculated for the audience, the people who would see her as the epitome of grace and strength. But Zainab's mind kept flickering back to the woman in the crowd, short, dark-complexioned, late 20s maybe, and pretty, the one who had caught her eye earlier, standing near the back, almost like a shadow among the sea of well-dressed guests. There was something about her, something unsettling. Zainab couldn't place her, but her presence was undeniable. Who was she? The woman looked familiar, but Zainab couldn't connect the dots. Trying to shake the feeling, Zainab turned her attention back to the event. It was another day in the spotlight, another day where she had to be flawless. But the feeling of being watched lingered, gnawing at the back of her mind. Later, as the fundraiser proceeded with speeches and acknowledgments, Zainab remained on edge. The woman, she was still there, watching. Then it clicked. This woman used to work for her a few months ago. She hadn't been fired as far as Zainab could remember, so what could she be doing here? Zainab thought, thinking the woman had a nefarious look on her face. Zainab was growing increasingly confused. As she stood by the podium, making her final remarks, the woman stepped forward, her heels clicking across the polished floor, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Zainab looked toward security, only to see they were gone, distracted by a small group of protesters with "Share the Wealth" written on banners outside the building. She felt a flicker of anger that she and her husband were left vulnerable as a result. Zainab's smile faltered as the woman approached the microphone. What was she doing? The room fell into an awkward silence, and Zainab gave a nervous smile to the audience, but her heart began to beat faster. She wasn't prepared for this. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the woman said calmly, her voice carrying across the room. "But I have waited a long time for this very moment." Zainab blinked, her smile fading as her gaze locked onto the woman. What was this? Zainab's mind raced, but she stood frozen in place. This wasn't part of the plan. The woman continued, her voice steady but sharp. "My name is Adora Obiori," she said, her eyes locking with Zainab's. "And I'm the daughter of Sarah Obiori, Senator Obiori's first wife." Gasps and murmurs reverberated through the distinguished crowd. Zainab's blood ran cold. She could almost feel her hair turning gray with shock. The words hit her like a sledgehammer. Adora Obiori, the daughter she had thought was dead, was alive. Zainab's breath caught in her throat. She stood frozen, her eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. How? How was this possible? She had thought she had buried that chapter of her life years ago, covered up the truth of the car accident. The plan had been perfect, but now, standing before her, was the child she had presumed lost forever. Adora, alive. Senator Obiori grabbed his chest and stumbled backward. The guests screamed and stood to their feet. Several assistants rushed to catch him, but not Zainab. She stood frozen, staring at the girl. "Adora?" Adora's gaze never wavered as she spoke again. "You all know the story. Sarah Obiori, my mother, tragically died in a car accident 25 years ago. I was also believed to have died in that accident. But as you can see, I survived. And what you also don't know is that the accident was anything but. My mother's car was tampered with, which resulted in the car slamming head-on into an oncoming truck, and our car was sent off the side of the road down a hill. My mother was killed instantly. God saved me. And what you also don't know is who was responsible for the accident. Zainab Obiori. Lies. Zainab finally managed to whisper, still standing like a statue of fear. She felt her legs weaken beneath her, but she did not fall. Adora's voice rang out across the room, cutting through Zainab's panic. I'm here to expose the truth. Zainab Obiori, you killed my mother. You thought you could cover it all up. But I'm here now, and I'm here to make sure you rot in prison for the rest of your miserable life for what you did to me and my mother. Zainab's heart pounded in her chest, her mind frantically racing. Damage control, she thought. She needed a way to regain control. But there was no controlling this moment. Then the grand doors flew open, and security stumbled in, rushing down the aisle toward the stage. Adora said, I've waited years to confront you. Her eyes locked onto Zainab, cold and unblinking. I've spent years searching for the truth, piecing together the fragments of a life I was never allowed to know. But now, I'm here, and everyone will know that Mrs. Senator Zainab Obiori is a criminal and a murderer. My mother is not the only woman who has fallen at the hands of this devil. Zainab's chest tightened, her mouth dry. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, the pressure mounting. The cameras clicked, and the whispers began. She tried to maintain her poise, but inside, she was unraveling. Doubt, she muttered to herself as she stumbled forward, watching as they dragged Adora down the aisle toward the doors. I need to create doubt. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit. It's all taken care of now. This was obviously just another young girl obsessed with the Obiori family. But some of the guests looked unconvinced, especially as the young woman being dragged down the aisle bore a striking resemblance to Senator Obiori, who was on the ground, being fanned by assistants. Is there a doctor in the house? Zainab heard her assistant yell, and at least a dozen men and women ran forward, all medical doctors. Just as Zainab prepared to feign the distressed wife whose husband was on the ground having a heart attack, she caught sight of a man who sent a chill down her spine. Detective Obinna, standing tall and intimidating at the back of the grand hall. The same detective who had taken down her ally and puppet, Commissioner Obasi. He had solved the Rhea Rain murder without fear. And the way he looked at her made Zainab afraid. 24 hours later, Zainab stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her senator's mansion, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. But inside, her world was darkening. The police were on their way. They had interviewed the little witch and had now had a warrant issued for Zainab's arrest. If she thought Nora Uche was a problem, she was mistaken. Nora Uche had nothing on this little witch, who just showed up after 25 years. And if Zainab is proven guilty, it would bring her world crashing down. It would cost her everything: the marriage, her status, and the Obiori name. Attempts to bribe the police and even the new commissioner had failed. Zainab had tried everything, but it was too much for even her money and influence to undo. She had called her son and daughter, who were studying abroad, to return immediately. If she was going down for this, she needed them by her side. Her children would never betray her. Her thoughts drifted to her husband, Senator Obiori. Ever since the night of the gala, when he learned her deadly secret, he chose to believe the rumors swirling around her. He hadn't spoken to her since. She knew exactly where he was now, at their village mansion. He had no idea that she had tracked his phone, and Zainab preferred it that way. It was better he stayed there, out of sight, while she tried to figure a way out of this mess. But deep in her gut, Zainab knew this could be the end. She spent the afternoon destroying as much evidence as she could: files, hard drives, USBs, accounts. She called in favors, but none of it seemed to matter now. Lagos's top defense lawyer and friend, Mrs. Ifeoma Okiki, was on her way, but Zainab wasn't sure she could get there in time. The police were closing in. Just then, the phone rang. "Well?" Zainab asked nervously as she answered. "I'm sorry, ma'am," came the voice on the other end, "but that young lady in question is in police protection. We can't get to her." Zainab's chest tightened. She felt a cold sweat break out on her skin. "What do you mean? Did you bribe the officers holding her?" she demanded. "Yes, ma'am. This girl has level 5 security." "Level 5 security? This is Lagos. There is no such thing." Zainab threw the phone across the room in frustration, her whole body trembling with rage. Then there was a knock at the door. She rushed to open it, her breath catching in her throat. "Ifeoma, thank God you're here." But standing on the doorstep wasn't her lawyer. It was several officers, almost like every officer in the city was sent to get her. One of them stepped forward. "Mrs. Zainab Obiori," the officer said, his voice cold. "You're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Obiori and the attempted murder of Adora Obiori." The blood drained from Zainab's face as her gaze flicked to the open gates. She could see the reporters gathering outside, cameras flashing. "I'm finished," Zainab muttered under her breath as the weight of her actions finally caught up to her. Zainab had only been in the cell for a few hours, but it felt like days. The stifling air in the Lagos police station's holding room was unbearable, but she refused to sit. She stood the entire time, every muscle in her body tense, her mind racing. The last thing she wanted was to sit and feel contaminated by the other inmates in the same cell. Her pride wouldn't allow it, nor would the thought of losing her dignity in front of anyone, let alone common criminals. At least her wrongdoings had led to a life of luxury and power, unlike the petty criminals she shared the foul air with. The loud clang of the cell door startled her. 2 officers walked in. For a brief moment she thought the new commissioner had finally come to his senses and was here to get her out. It seems he cannot be bribed like his predecessor. Once this was all over, she would deal with him for crossing her. However, by the looks on the officers' faces, it was clear they hadn't come to release her. Grabbing her arm, Zainab stumbled out of the cell. "Come with us," they barked. They led her to an interrogation room, cold and sterile, with flickering fluorescent lights overhead. The officers sat at a small metal table across from her, their eyes scanning her like vultures. Zainab was pushed into a short wooden chair. The cuffs were removed, but they told her to take off her shoes. When she refused, she was greeted with a sharp slap across the face. "You think this is American TV? This is Lagos. You do as we say, or we'll beat you blue-black." Zainab studied the hard-looking officer, probably in his early to mid-40s. He would be the first, she thought. Once she was out of here, she would kill him first. She smirked. "You think this is funny?" the other officer yelled. A stocky woman with thick natural hair pulled into a low bun, late 30s. They grabbed her gold-bottom shoes and looked at them with a smile. "These look like they could fit me." Zainab smiled again, knowing just one of the shoes was worth more than the officer's annual salary. "You will be next," she thought. The male officer began by throwing old images of a car wreck on the table. 25 years ago, a young woman was killed, and her 3-year-old daughter was seriously injured in a horrific motor accident. He named the street, day, and time. "What can you tell me about this accident?" Zainab threw her head back and laughed. "There are hundreds of accidents every year, officers." "How would I know who and what this is?" She laughed mockingly again. "Lagos's finest," she muttered under her breath, which was abruptly halted when another hot slap hit her lips. "Is there something funny here, madam?" the male officer yelled. Zainab stared at him, wiping the blood from her split lip with the back of her hand. It wouldn't just be him. She would take out his entire family. Her mind whispered slowly as she stared into his soul. American TV or not, I am not saying a word until I speak to my lawyer first. The officers looked at each other and chuckled. That's if she can find you. She's driving all around Lagos police stations looking for you. They laughed, their voices mocking. Then, just as suddenly, the female officer stopped laughing and stared at Zainab with eyes that promised another hot slap, and more if she didn't start talking. What do you know about the accident involving Sarah Obiori and her 3-year-old daughter, Adora Obiori? The accident where Sarah died, and little Adora had every bone in her body broken. Doctors back then said it was a miracle she survived. Did you put a hit out on Sarah and Adora? No, Zainab snapped. What if I told you that we have witnesses who say you hired Sarah Obiori's mechanic to tamper with the brakes? The male officer asked. I have no idea what you're talking about. Zainab shifted in the chair and looked to the door. Ifeoma should have been here a long time ago, she thought. The female officer giggled. Why do you keep looking at the door? Nobody's coming, madam. That much I can assure you. And the other thing I can assure you is, we'll get a confession out of you tonight. The male officer got up and locked the door. He smiled crookedly as he stood behind Zainab. For the first time since this all began, Zainab felt a flicker of uncertainty. Now, let me rephrase the question. What do you know about the accident that caused the death of this woman and the near death of a 3-year-old? I don't know anything, Zainab screamed, hoping someone would hear her. Just then, the male officer standing behind her took off his belt and slowly wrapped it around his hand, the buckle dangling. Zainab's eyes widened as she looked back at him. Madame, we can sit here all night, or you can just confess. I don't know what you're talking about. I need my... Just then, the officer swung the belt over his shoulder to strike. The door flew open, and in marched Barrister Ifeoma Okiki. If you value your entire career and freedom, you will step back and move away from my client. Startled, the officer quickly moved away. He looked at the door to see another officer with a key in his hand. I need to speak with my client. Now, alone, Ifeoma shouted. When the room was cleared and they were alone, Ifeoma sat gently on the chair opposite Zainab. Her face was frozen as she saw the Iron Lady bleed. Ifeoma stuttered at first. Are you okay? She asked instead. No, Ifeoma, Zainab muttered, pressing the back of her hand to her lip. Ifeoma grabbed a tissue from her purse and handed it to her friend. A flicker of pity came over her. I hope you didn't tell them anything. Zainab shook her head. No. Good. So tell me, who is this girl? Why is she claiming that she is Senator Obiori's daughter? I have no idea. I have to ask. The press, vlogs, social media, the internet, even beggars on the streets are talking about this. They're saying some horrible things about you. How much of it is true? Did you have anything to do with the death of your husband's first wife? And what about the girl? Is what she's saying true? Zainab looked at the blood-stained tissue in her hand. She knew it was time to stop pretending. She smiled at Ifeoma, a smile that made the defense attorney uneasy. You know, Zainab began, I wasn't always a monster. I was once a young, ambitious college graduate who wanted more than all I had worked hard for. They say, if you work hard enough, if you put in enough effort, you'll be successful. Well, that's not always true. Ifeoma's brows furrowed. Do you want to hear a little story, Ifeoma? A story not even you know? Ifeoma readied her tablet. Do you mind if I take notes? Zainab shook her head. I trust you. Somehow, Ifeoma didn't believe that. It all started with a difficult childhood. Zainab began, her voice measured. I know. You probably think I'm about to play the trauma card. Another sob story. One of those, my father left, so I became a villain tales. She chuckled, but there was no amusement in it. But here's the thing, I don't believe in excuses. 8 out of 10 people who say their past made them do terrible things, they're lying. They knew better. I knew better. She clasped her hands together and leaned forward. When my father left us, my mother, my siblings, he didn't look back, not once. My mother, she crumbled. The doctors said it was heart disease, but I knew. It was a broken heart, stress, grief, a kind of pain you don't walk away from. So at 13, I became everything. Mother, father, nurse, teacher. The oldest child always carries the curse of duty. She paused as if gauging Ifyoma's reaction, then continued. I studied. I kept myself pure, focused. No distractions. I had one mission, get us out of that life. After high school, I convinced my mother to sell the only land we had, a gift from her father. I used it to go to college. A faint smile played on her lips. I studied politics and social studies, not because I had a passion for it, but because the professor did. For me, he liked seeing me in his class. I could tell. I used that. Not in a vulgar way. Nothing ever happened. But I played the game, and I won. Her voice softened. When I graduated, I thought I'd walk into a job, make money, pay my mother back, send my brother to school, but life... She exhaled sharply. Life humbled me. She leaned back, letting her words sit in the air. I ended up in the market, selling clothes, 14 hours a day, barely making enough to eat, living in a one-room shack. But I didn't give up. I saved, bought my own stock, started my own stall. Her jaw tightened. My old boss didn't like that. One day I showed up. It was gone. Burned. Everything. She looked away, eyes narrowed at a memory that still stung. I went back home, defeated, and what did I get? My younger siblings mocking me, insults, disappointment. I realized then I wasn't going to find redemption in that house. I had a degree, a 2-1 in politics and social studies. I was going to use it. Zainab leaned forward again, her eyes locking onto Ifyoma's. That decision is why I'm here today. She didn't wait for a response. Obiori wasn't a senator yet. He was just a logistics guy with ambition. His campaign team was gearing up for a big Senate run, and I volunteered. For free. No salary. Just determination. She shrugged. I knew what I was doing. I worked harder than anyone else, stayed late, took initiative, and after 3 months, I met him. Her lips curled into a faint smile. He wasn't tall, but he moved like someone who commanded rooms, carried himself like a man who had already won. He barely noticed me, just the occasional hello, but that was fine. I knew he'd see me eventually. Her voice dropped. Then came Sarah. The wife, Ifyoma asked, just to reinforce the hypocrisy of it all. Zainab nodded. Pregnant, smiling, floating into the campaign like she owned it, married to Obiori, everyone adored her. But me? I saw through it. I saw the laziness, the entitlement. She hadn't paid her dues. She just arrived and basked in everything I'd built. Zainab's expression didn't change, but her voice thickened. It wasn't enough, not anymore. I wanted what she had, and I was going to get it. She let the silence linger before meeting Ifyoma's eyes once again. I guess that's when the real story began. Zainab's eyes dropped to the table for a moment as if the memory still left a bitter taste in her mouth. After we secured that fat donation from that oil baron, you know the type, bloated ego, bloated wallet, we celebrated. Champagne, brandy, loud laughter. Power makes men act like gods, and that night I let myself act like a fool. She didn't look at Ifeoma as she said it. I knew better. I did. But I ignored it. For the first time in my life, I didn't care what better even looked like. Her fingers traced an invisible line on the table's surface. That's when the affair started. At first, I kept it quiet, discreet. I respected his family time like a good little secret. I scheduled myself around his lies. I was busy when he was with Sarah. I was in meetings when he took Adora to the park. She let the name settle. Adora. There was a long pause. Then her tone changed, soft, almost venomous. He loved that girl, too much. You could see it in the way he looked at her, touched her hair like it was precious cotton candy. And I hated it. I hated how she walked around like the world was hers. Zainab looked up now. Her face was blank, but her voice had weight. It ate at me. Every smile, every giggle, every time he called her his princess. It was like watching him give all the love I worked so hard for to someone else. She blinked, then added quietly, I hated myself for thinking that, for feeling that. But that hate was the only thing that felt real after a while. She leaned back in her chair. And then I got pregnant. She let the words drop like a grenade between them. I wasn't on birth control, despite what he thought. It took a while, but eventually, I was carrying his child. She smiled, bitter and broken. You'd think he'd be happy, but no. The first thing out of his mouth wasn't joy or surprise. It was anger, panic. He asked me, how would Sarah take it? As if I was just a problem to solve. She scoffed. I remember what my mother said when she found out. How could you stoop so low? That's what she asked me. After what your father did to me, to us, and now you've done the same. Zainab's jaw tensed. I couldn't even answer her. I just walked out, left with nothing but a promise to myself. I was going to get what was mine. I'd suffered enough. Life owed me. That Senate seat, that was my redemption. She paused long enough for Ifeoma to react, but Ifeoma didn't speak. She just breathed deeply, arms crossed, eyes heavy with disbelief. Oh boy, Ifeoma muttered, checking the room again. This is a lot. But Zainab wasn't finished, not even close. I started making my presence felt. This was before social media, before you could post cryptic quotes online. No Instagram, no Facebook, just raw visibility. I showed up at events I knew Sarah would be at. I called him late at night. I smiled at him too long, touched his arm too gently. She raised an eyebrow. Not enough to start a fight, but enough for a wife to feel it. We speak a different language. We side chicks and wives. No words needed. Her tone cooled. Eventually, Sarah confronted me. Straight to my face, told me to back off, said she'd never agree to a second wife, told me Obiori would never marry me without her blessing. Zainab looked almost impressed as she recalled it. She wasn't wrong. Her voice dipped. That night, he came to me, told me to get rid of it, the baby, pleaded, begged, shamed me, said he'd lose everything, said I'd ruin him. She let out a dry laugh. So I flipped the script, threatened to go to the press. He panicked again, came back darker this time. Threats, real ones. She tapped a nail on the table. That's when I realized I'd been playing checkers in a chess game. She looked Ifeoma square in the eye now. So I did what smart women do. I told him I got rid of it. Told Sarah I was sorry. Played the humble, broken woman. A pause. Her smile returned. But I was biding my time. Her voice softened, turned cold. People think words are dangerous, but silence is sharper. Silence waits. Zainab smoothed her dress slowly, eyes fixed on the table between them. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low and calm, too calm. Time was running out, she said. I knew my pregnancy would start to show soon, and I also knew, if I didn't move strategically, I'd lose everything I'd worked for. She met Ifeoma's eyes, unflinching. Sarah Obiori had to go. The words hung in the air, chilling and unapologetic. Ifeoma continued tapping on her tablet. No reaction, but inside she felt something rising. I'd spent too many years building this man's career, shaping his path to the Senate, and I wasn't going to be remembered as the side chick he used and discarded. No, that wasn't going to be my story. Zainab leaned slightly forward, her fingers tapping against the edge of the table in rhythmic defiance. Her car had been giving her problems for weeks. Everyone knew it. It was all she complained about. And when the mechanic finally called to say her vehicle was ready, everything clicked into place. She paused, watching Ifeoma's face carefully. She was on herbal teas for depression, because of the infidelity, because of me. A faint smile touched the corners of her mouth. The more erratic Sarah became, the quieter I got. She raged, I smiled. She shouted, I stood still. I didn't need to fight her in public. I just had to wait. Ifeoma muttered under her breath, like a green snake in green grass. Zainab's eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't appreciate the jab, but she let it pass. My first two hires were a maid and a mechanic. I told you before, money talks. In this town, money screams. Ifeoma exhaled loudly, picking up her tablet again. Go ahead, she said flatly. Zainab paused and stared at her for a beat longer than necessary. Something had shifted in Ifeoma. Zainab could see it in her posture, in the way her jaw tensed. They weren't just two old friends talking anymore. The maid laced Sarah's dinner. The mechanic tampered with her brakes. It was efficient, quiet, elegant, even. She smiled at the memory, thin, soulless. If there was an award for the perfect plan, we'd have taken it. Ifeoma didn't bother hiding her disgust anymore. The distance between them felt cavernous now, the years of friendship collapsing under the weight of Zainab's confession. For all these years, she said quietly, the world believed Sarah died in a tragic accident. Toxicology reports hinted at something suspicious, Ifeoma went on. But the grieving, loyal campaign manager Zainab, so present, so sympathetic, no one questioned it. The perfect plan, you say? Zainab's eyes turned icy. Do we have a problem, Ifeoma? Ifeoma looked up sharply. No, she said, but her voice had tightened. Zainab leaned in, voice cool. You seem tense. Before Ifeoma could respond, Zainab's expression shifted. Did I kill Sarah Obiori? She said softly. Did I injure her 3-year-old daughter? She turned her gaze to the door, then back again. Her lips curled into something between a smirk and a threat. I'm telling you all this because I expect to walk out of here tonight. I'm not spending a single night in this hellhole. But if you think, for 1 second, that you can double-cross me, just know this ship will sink, with both of us on it. Ifeoma's face hardened. What's that supposed to mean, Zainab? Zainab's smile widened. Don't act like you've forgotten. That little matter I cleaned up for you years ago. She savored the color draining from Ifeoma's face. Oh, you thought I'd let that go. No, my dear friend, I don't keep people in my life unless they're useful. Every one of you owes me something. Ifeoma fumbled for words. I was just, you were just about to forget, Zainab cut in, and play yourself, Mrs. Okeke. Silence pulsed between them. Ifeoma cleared her throat, stiffened her spine. Continue, Zainab. Zainab smiled like a woman reclaiming her throne. I became the face of his grief, she said matter-of-factly. People cried with me. They admired me. They said, what a strong woman, helping him through this tragedy. I sat beside him during every hearing, wiped fake tears at every interview. She laughed. And when my pregnancy became obvious, the story changed again. It was divine timing. God had taken one child and given him another. The people rallied behind us. They said it was fate, a blessing. She tilted her head. Soon I became Mrs. Zainab Obiori, wife of Senator Obiori. Public pressure helped, of course. He was too busy rising in politics to keep mourning Sarah. And me? I slid into the role like I was born for it. Her voice softened, but it only made the moment colder. I gave him a son, his second child, his legacy. Zainab looked Ifeoma dead in the eye. Don't you agree, Mrs. Okeke? Zainab smoothed the crease in her sleeve, her tone shifting now. Not soft, not angry, just factual. I became Mrs. Zainab Obiori, she said, the first lady of the Obiori Empire, or at least that's how I saw it. To the cameras, I was grace, elegance, the perfect senator's wife. But behind the closed doors of that glass house, I was something else entirely. She paused, eyes focused on something past Ifeoma. Maybe memory, maybe delusion. You know he wouldn't have gotten anywhere without me, right? Ifeoma didn't answer, and Zainab didn't wait for one. Obiori didn't have half the drive I did, or the brains. He had charisma, sure. He could deliver a speech, smile at the right time. But that's not what makes a man win elections. I made the machine run. She leaned forward. I made the connections. I crafted his image. I spun every scandal into sympathy. I knew which journalists to bribe, which godfathers to flatter, which enemies to destroy quietly. A smile flickered across her face. When he became a senator, they said he was Nigeria's golden son. But the truth is, he was my invention. He was a brand, and I built it from scratch. Zainab's tone sharpened like a blade. Of course, none of it was clean. You don't climb a mountain in politics without getting blood in your fingernails. We weren't saints. We were kings. She folded her arms. Bribes, backdoor deals, laundering campaign funds through shell accounts. I knew it all. Every dirty contractor, every padded contract. And I kept the books tidy. Because we weren't just building a political career. We were building an empire. And empires aren't built with prayers. Ifeoma's pen tapped silently against her tablet, but she didn't interrupt. She glanced at Ifeoma now, her eyes sharper. I managed everything. When scandals came close, I killed the story before it took breath. When journalists sniffed around, I fed them enough fluff to choke on. I wasn't just his wife, I was his shield. Then, Zainab's tone dipped, more bitter now. But for all I did, he still couldn't stay loyal. Her jaw tightened just slightly. The affairs started once he got too comfortable. The power got to his head. And the first time I caught him, she tapped the table once. She was gone within 72 hours. Zainab didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Another came. Zainab continued. She was smiling too much at the wrong event, disappeared by the weekend, and no, I wasn't going to let anyone do to me what I did to Sarah. Never. A breath. The cycle repeated. I cleaned house, quietly, efficiently. I protected my position. And then Zainab's voice shifted, slowed, darkened. But then came Nora. Zainab's fingers stopped moving. Her eyes held something cold, distant, calculating. Nora Uche. She didn't say more. Not yet. She just leaned back slightly, letting the name settle in the air like gunpowder before a flame. The side chick that almost brought my house crashing down. Do you know he told her he was going to propose to her? Ifyoma stared expressionless, then said, he was with her a long time. Ifyoma leaned in, her gaze sharp. Zainab, they'll be questioning Nora soon. They're sending investigators to the village, trying to get her to talk. You know they're going to push her, right? See if she'll testify against you. Zainab's lips curled into a smile, low and dark. She let out a laugh, the sound echoing through the small room. Ifyoma, do you know anything about the human mind? Studies? The brain's ability to break under extreme isolation and darkness? Zainab's voice dropped to a murmur, her eyes glinting with an unsettling calm. You push someone far enough, isolate them, and eventually, their mind cracks. They forget. They lose themselves. Ifyoma stiffened, not understanding at first. What are you getting at? Zainab's smile deepened. I'm saying that I am not worried about her. Nora Uche will never testify. She won't say a word. You know why? She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Ifyoma. Because I broke her. I took her mind piece by piece. Imagine pushing someone to the point of wishing for their death. Zainab chuckled softly, the sound colder than ice. Yes, I didn't just shut her up. Ifyoma, she returned to the village, a shadow of herself. My sources say she has yet to speak. Ifyoma stared at Zainab, her mouth dry. You really did that? Isn't that a little sadistic? I thought you said you saw something in her. Zainab's laugh deepened almost in amusement. Yes, me. I saw me. And as you know, I am not to be crossed or played with. Ifyoma stared at Zainab. It was almost as if the woman she had known for all these years was somehow replaced by this soulless woman before her. So, Zainab said, as if waking up from a trance, shall we get out of here? Ifyoma hesitated. She wasn't sure Zainab should be back on the streets. She was sure she would go after Adora Ibiori. She could see it in her eyes. So now we know that Adora was not in that coffin. Who was buried that day, Zainab? Zainab shrugged. Your guess is as good as mine. I just paid to get a job done. Ifyoma made a note to have the grave of Adora exhumed. She wouldn't let Zainab know, but the world needed to know who was buried that day. In the living room of the large mansion in Obiori's village sat Senator Obiori, looking frail and worn. Beside him, Adora sat on the floor, her presence a stark contrast to her father's aged demeanor. Detective Obinna sat across from them, his gaze shifting between the two. Thank you for keeping my daughter safe, Detective, Obiori said, his voice breaking as he gently stroked his revenant daughter's thick, curly hair. She was so much like her mother. It took his breath away every time he looked at her. I would have made an arrest weeks ago, Detective Obinna replied. But I promised your daughter to let this play out as she had planned. She spent years uncovering the truth about who she was and what had happened to her. Obiori's eyes softened as he turned to Adora. I want you to know, I had no idea Zainab did this to you and your mother. None. I know that now, Papa. I was just 3 when it all happened. And I grew up thinking it was just a bad dream. I would have nightmares about a loud crash, a woman screaming, and a long bus ride. That's all I could remember. A tear slipped down Senator Obiori's cheek. When I think about everything you've been through, it breaks my heart. They had spent every moment together since her return at the gala. The mild heart attack he suffered at the gala upon seeing his daughter for the first time in 25 years was a mixture of overwhelming emotions, but most importantly, a love that consumed him completely. The last time he saw her, she was bribing him for balloons and chocolate ice cream in exchange for going to bed early. He smiled softly, recalling that moment. Now, here she was, fighting for her right to exist as an Obiori. So, Detective Obinna cleared his throat, his voice steady. We spoke to your parents, Adora, in Enugu State. They tell quite the story. They say you were found wandering the streets of Enugu, and after searching aimlessly for your parents, they took you in and raised you. All lies, Adora interjected. They bought me from a cruel child trafficker 25 years ago. They were childless. When he came to them, he told them I was from Lagos, that I'd been in a car wreck. He also told them I was the daughter of a wealthy family. Instead of doing the right thing and returning me, they kept me. At first, they were nice, doting, even loving, took care of all my hospital bills after the wreck, nursed me back to health. I can remember that much. Then, I got excited that I was going to have a little sister. That's when everything began to change. I went from being the precious only child to the overworked elder sister to the nanny when my younger brothers arrived. Eventually, I became the despised house girl when the family grew too large. And finally, I was seen as an unwanted mouth to feed. Another tear slipped from Obiori's eye. I am so sorry, my daughter. I had no idea. It's okay, Papa, Adora said softly. You didn't know I was alive. Zainab, Obiori shook his head, his expression a mixture of anger and sorrow. Zainab, why? Why were you sent to destroy my life? So, when did you find out you were Senator Obiori's daughter? Detective Obinna asked, his voice laced with curiosity. Adora exhaled deeply. After years of beatings and hunger, one day, my mother fell ill. She had kidney disease. The doctors tested all of us children, and I was the only one who wasn't a match. Now, I know it's not uncommon for family members to be blood relatives, but still not a match. But that moment ignited something in me. It was the catalyst for everything. I started asking questions, and I was beaten for them until my mother screamed at me in frustration one day. She told me I was an abandoned orphan, unwanted by anyone. That was the moment I left that house. Months later, I tracked down the man who had sold me. He was old and, I guess, wanted to repent for his sins. He's the one who helped me find the truth. That led me to Lagos. And you, Papa. From my research, I learned that the car wreck investigation had been handled poorly. Only one body was recovered, but 2 were reported. It took years, but I finally tracked down all the key players in Zainab's plans, all those bought by Zainab's money, including Ebele the maid, and your very own mechanic at the time, Chima. I got a job working for one of Zainab's companies, and that's when I gained direct access to her shady dealings. Once I had enough evidence, I went to Detective Obinna here. I had heard of him from a big case he'd worked on, and I knew he was one of the good guys. Senator, Detective Obinna leaned forward. I know you know we've uncovered a lot about Zainab's shady dealings, but you're no angel either. I have enough to bury Zainab and put you in prison for a long time. Obiori nodded, hanging his head in shame. So here's what I propose, Detective Obinna continued. You may be a criminal, but Zainab's hands are soaked in blood. Help me bring her down, and I'll see what I can do to reduce your prison time. Obiori's tears flowed freely now. As much as he wanted to see justice for his long-lost daughter, Zainab was the mother of his children and only son. They would never forgive him for betraying their mother. He had never really loved Zainab, not truly. His heart had always belonged to Sarah and Adora. But when he was told they had died, Zainab became his shoulder to lean on. She was pregnant with his daughter, Zina, and at the time, he saw it as a second chance. Little did he know who he was marrying. He nodded, then looked at Detective Obinna. What do you need to know, Detective? It's time to make all my wrongs right. Zena and Maxwell Obiori had barely stepped through the large, ornate gates of Obiori's village mansion when the heavy weight of their return hit them. The house that once felt like a symbol of power and family now seemed like a prison. The lush gardens and expansive grounds only served as a reminder of what had crumbled beneath their feet. Their parents had dragged them into this mess, and now they were caught between the mother they still wanted to love and the woman whose actions disgusted them. Obiori was sitting in the grand living room, looking frail and worn. The weight of the years, of the choices he had made, was clearly etched into his face. The man who once seemed so powerful now looked broken. Zena sat down beside him, her mind racing. Maxwell stood by the window, arms folded tightly across his chest, his face unreadable. The tension in the room was suffocating. "I can't believe this is happening," Maxwell muttered, his voice a mixture of anger and disbelief. "She's your wife. How can you, Papa? How can you do this to Mom?" Obiori's weary eyes met his son's, but there was no anger in them, only sorrow. "I didn't want to do this. You think I haven't been torn apart by all this? But your mother did a very terrible thing. She ordered the death of a woman and a 3-year-old, my first wife and child." His voice cracked. "I can't keep protecting her anymore. This one is bigger than me. I have to do what's right. I have to testify against your mother for the sake of my daughter she left for dead. There's no other choice." "Interesting, Papa," Zena said, sorrow in her heart. "And so it's now you want to do what is right? After 25 years of corruption and devastation to businesses and businessmen, not to mention the little man, you and Mom trampled on them. Now you want to do what is right?" Zena took a deep breath, teeth clenched. She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes, but she pushed them down. "We're your children too, Papa," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What about what will happen to us?" "You children are grown now. You will have to find your own way," Obiori said softly. "Learn from your parents and make better choices. But most importantly, never stain your hands with blood. I cannot and will not protect a murderer." Maxwell turned, his face hard. "You're betraying her. I can't believe you're choosing your daughter over her. She made you who you are." "And who am I, Maxwell?" Obiori chuckled bitterly through his tears. "A disgrace, stripped of my title, and before the year ends, I'll be stripped of everything else. You say I was made? You call murder, extortion, kidnapping, and embezzlement being made?" Obiori laughed sarcastically. "I love you children so much, but if I knew this is how my life would have ended up, I would have fired your mother the day Sarah asked me to." Zena glanced at her younger brother Maxwell, who looked away, clearly struggling. "So that's it? This is all Mom's fault? You were just some innocent bystander while Mom the monster ruined your life? She can just go rot now, all because you both got caught? Because from what I've heard, the two of you have been terrorizing this town for a long time." "No, my beautiful daughter, on the contrary. I own up to my part of the decisions I made. I will go to prison for what I have done. Your mother will do the same. Zainab crossed the line when she murdered my wife and tried to murder my child. I could have forgiven most things, but not this." The next morning, Zena found herself sitting in Detective Obina's office. She had tried to block out everything that had been happening, but the reality of it hit her harder than she ever anticipated. The weight of her mother's crimes was crushing, and the knowledge that her father was choosing to testify against Zainab made her feel helpless. But she wasn't about to give up. Not yet. "I'll give you anything," Zena said, leaning forward, desperation in her eyes. "Money, power, influence. Just make this go away. I can make sure this whole thing disappears. I'll do whatever it takes." Detective Obina leaned back in his chair, his gaze cold and unyielding. "You think money can fix this?" he asked, his voice stern. Your mother's actions are bigger than that. They're crimes that can't be covered up. Zena's jaw tightened. She was used to getting what she wanted, used to bending people to her will. But there was something in the detective's eyes that told her this time would be different. You don't know who you're dealing with, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I do, Obina replied, standing up and walking to the door. And I'm not interested in your bribes. You've crossed a line, Miss Obiori. You're under arrest. Zena's heart dropped into her stomach as the door clicked shut behind her. She was escorted out of the office, handcuffed and thrown into a cell. The cold, damp air of the holding room did nothing to ease the pounding in her chest. It wasn't about the money. It was about the consequences of their family's actions, and she was trapped in it. Detective Obina released her the next day with a stiff warning and reminded her that the abuse of money will land her in her parents' situation if she wasn't careful. The courtroom was packed. The air felt heavy, as if everyone in the room knew the gravity of what was unfolding. Zainab stood before the judge, her hands cuffed, her expression impassive, looking a shadow of herself. She had fought this moment for so long, but now it had arrived. The weight of her past sins was closing in on her. Zainab's heart sank as the sentence was read aloud. Life in prison. Her face remained stoic, but inside she was unraveling. There would be more trials, more crimes to face. But for now, this was her fate. She could hear Ifeoma yelling at her as she was cuffed, telling her that they would appeal the decision. But everything around sounded muffled. The shock still rendered her mute. As she was led out of the courtroom, her gaze swept across the room. And there, sitting in the back, was Nora Uche, thin, gaunt, disheveled. It was clear that the torment Zainab had put her through for those missing 6 months had taken their toll on her. But what caught Zainab off guard was the look on Nora's face. There was no hatred, no anger, just quiet satisfaction. Their eyes met for a moment. Zainab felt the weight of her actions bear down on her, and for the first time, she understood the true cost of her choices. Or did she? Obiori sat in the prison visitation room, the harsh fluorescent lights casting a pale glow over his face. He had been sentenced to 7 years for embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion. His children, Zena and Maxwell, had already left for abroad. The guilt weighed heavily on him, but at least he knew his conscience was clear. The door opened, and in walked Adora, the daughter he loved even when he thought she was dead. She was older now, a woman, but her eyes held the same fire as when she was a child. She was petite, but no longer the frightened girl from years ago. Adora. Obiori whispered, his voice breaking as he stood up. I wasn't sure if I'd see you again. You thought I would flee like your other 2 children? She asked, shaking her head. They're still your brother and sister, Adora. Well, I don't think they see me that way, Papa. Adora smiled again, the hurt visible in her eyes. The detective kept to his word. Your sentence was reduced from 20 years to 7. It will go by fast, Papa, I promise. And I know testifying against Zainab, your wife wasn't easy. I wasn't there for you for 25 years. If 7 years in prison can make up for even a fraction of what was done to you and your mother, then it's a small price I'm willing to pay. Well, I promised I'd be here, Papa. When the time came, you chose me, and that's all that matters to me. I'm so sorry, Adora, Obiori said, his voice trembling. I just hope my beloved Sarah is finally resting in peace. Adora wiped a tear and forced a smile. 7 years from now, you will walk out of these gates, and I will be here waiting for you. Obiori felt the tears well up. After all the years of lost time, it felt like a small consolation, but it was something, and it was all he had left. 1 year into her life sentence, a hit list was discovered, a massive assassination plot orchestrated by Zainab. The plan was foiled just in time. At the top of Zainab's list, her husband, Chief Obiori, Adora Obiori, Detective Obinna, Judge Clearly, Ifeoma Okike. Officers Williams and Odunike, Ebele the maid and Chima the mechanic. Some say that just as Nora now sits mute beneath a mango tree, Zainab now sits alone in her cell, rocking back and forth, mumbling the same names over and over, the names of those who had crossed her. Hey, hey, story lovers, so there you have it. When I said karma wasn't finished in the side chicks versus the wives, I wasn't kidding. By the way, if you haven't seen the side chicks versus the wives where we first meet Zainab, click here to watch it. Now tell me, what do you think? Did Zainab deserve her sentence, or did she get off easy? So, that's it. Keep an eye out for the next upload. It's another great story with a powerful lesson about judging people. Until then, bye for now.